the desperate call. The crystalline spires of Ethros gleamed like frozen lightning against the purple sky, their surfaces reflecting the twin suns that had warmed the peaceful world for countless generations. The Zephyrian civilization had flourished. Here for over 3 millennia, their society built on harmony, art, and scientific advancement. Their cities floated gracefully above the cloud forests, connected by bridges of pure energy that hummed with gentle power. The Zephyrians themselves were beings of ethereal beauty, with translucent skin that shimmered with inner light and voices that could heal wounded hearts with their melodic tones. Ambassador Lyra Windcaller stood on the observation deck of her diplomatic vessel, watching her homeworld burn. The Crimson Swarm had arrived without warning, their massive bioships blotting out the stars like a plague of metal locusts. These weren't ships in any conventional sense, but living creatures, bred for war, their hulls pulsing with alien life and bristling with weapons that fired streams of corrosive plasma. The swarm consumed everything in their path, not just resources but entire populations, transforming living beings into fuel for their endless expansion. Lyra's hands trembled as she witnessed the destruction below. The floating cities of her people were falling one by one, their energy bridges severed, their crystal spires cracking under the assault of biocannons. The Zephyrians had no military to speak of, having lived in peace for so long that the concept of warfare was almost foreign to them. Their defense fleet consisted of ceremonial vessels designed for exploration and diplomacy, not combat. Against the Crimson Swarm's battle-hardened bioships, they were like butterflies facing a hurricane. The bridge of Lyra's ship erupted in urgent chatter as her crew reported the advancing enemy. Captain Vex, her oldest friend and the ship's commander, approached with grim news. His usually bright aura had dimmed to a pale glow, and his voice carried the weight of despair. The swarm's main force was moving toward the planetary capital, where millions of Zephyrians were trapped in the lower city levels. The evacuation ships were overwhelmed, and many had already been destroyed by swarm interceptors. Lyra made the hardest decision of her life. She ordered Captain Vex to break orbit and head for the Galactic Assembly at maximum speed. She couldn't save her people by staying, but perhaps she could find help elsewhere. As her ship jumped to hyperspace, she took one last look at Ethros through the viewport. The world that had been her paradise was now a vision of hell, its beauty being devoured by creatures that knew nothing but hunger and destruction. The journey to Station Nexus took 18 hours at emergency speed. Lyra spent every moment of the trip composing her plea, knowing that she would have only one chance to convince the Galactic Assembly to act. The Assembly was a coalition of over 200 species, united in their commitment to peaceful coexistence and mutual aid. However, their military capabilities were limited, as most member species had evolved beyond the need for large-scale warfare. The last time they had faced a threat like the Crimson Swarm, it had taken the combined efforts of 50 worlds to drive them back, and even then, the victory had come at tremendous cost. Station Nexus appeared before them like a geometric flower blooming in the void. The massive structure was a marvel of cooperative engineering, its sections designed to accommodate the environmental needs of hundreds of different species. The central assembly chamber was a sphere of transparent aluminum, surrounded by concentric rings that housed diplomatic quarters, translation centers, and administrative offices. As Lyra's ship docked, she could see other vessels arriving from across the galaxy, their crews likely carrying news of the swarm's advance. The great assembly chamber was already in session when Lyra arrived. The spherical room was filled with representatives from across known space, each seated in environments suited to their biology. Some floated in tanks of liquid methane, others basked under heat lamps that mimicked their home stars, and a few existed as pure energy patterns contained within force fields. The air thrummed with the constant hum of universal translators working to convert hundreds of languages into comprehensible speech. Elder Counselor Thane of the Korthax Republic called the session to order. The Korthax were an ancient species, having achieved spaceflight when most other races were still discovering fire. Thane's forearms gestured gracefully as he spoke, his voice carrying the authority of millennia of experience. He had received preliminary reports of the swarm's return, but he wanted to hear directly from someone who had witnessed the attack. Lyra stepped forward to the central podium, her form seeming to glow with inner light despite her grief. She began to speak, her melodic voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite the babble of languages around her. She described the beauty of Ethros, the peaceful nature of her people, and the horror of the swarm's assault. She painted a picture of cities falling, of families torn apart, of an entire civilization facing extinction. Her words were not just translated but felt, as the emotional resonance of her species touched the hearts of every being present. The reaction was immediate but not hopeful. Representative Corvin of the Hegemony of Worlds spoke first, his mechanical voice flat and emotionless. The Hegemony had faced the swarm before and barely survived. Their automated defense systems had held the line, but at the cost of 3 entire star systems. He stated bluntly that no conventional military force could stop the swarm once they had achieved critical mass. The only option was to evacuate what populations they could and establish defensive perimeters around the core worlds. Other representatives echoed similar sentiments. The Aquatic Collective had lost 2 ocean worlds to the swarm 50 years ago. The Silicon Confederacy had been forced to relocate their entire civilization to avoid the advancing bioships. Each species had their own tale of loss and retreat, but none had a solution for stopping the swarm's advance. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The Crimson Swarm grew stronger with each world they consumed, while the defending forces grew weaker with each defeat. Lyra felt her hope dying as she listened to the litany of excuses and limitations. The Assembly had the resources to evacuate perhaps 1 million refugees, but her homeworld held over 30 million souls. The swarm would reach the core systems within months, and when they did, the death toll would be beyond calculation. She was preparing to collapse in despair when Elder Counselor Thane raised one of his 4 arms for silence. Thane's ancient eyes looked thoughtful as he accessed the Assembly's membership records. There was one option that hadn't been considered, he said slowly. The newest members of the Assembly, admitted just 6 months ago after making first contact, the humans of Earth had been granted provisional membership despite their primitive technology and recent emergence into space. Most representatives had barely noticed the addition, dismissing Earth as an insignificant backwater world on the rim of explored space. The suggestion was met with skepticism and some outright laughter. Representative Corvin's mechanical voice dripped with disdain as he recited Earth's statistics. A single world with a population of 8 billion beings crammed onto a planet that was classified as a Class 9 hazard world. Their technology was centuries behind galactic standards. Their ships were crude and inefficient, and they had been in space for less than 200 years. What could such a primitive species possibly offer against a threat that had defeated civilizations with millennia of experience? Thane pulled up Earth's classification file, and several representatives made sounds of disgust. The planet was a nightmare by galactic standards, with crushing gravity, corrosive atmosphere, violent weather patterns, and dangerous radiation from their star. The native life forms were unusually aggressive, having evolved in a constant state of competition and conflict. The humans themselves were classified as persistence predators, a rare and disturbing evolutionary path that produced beings capable of hunting prey to exhaustion over vast distances. Counselor Vex of the Peaceful Traders Union pointed out that Earth's oceans contained compounds that would be toxic to most galactic species. The planet's magnetic field was unstable, causing frequent radiation storms. The continental plates were actively shifting, causing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Most species would require full environmental suits just to visit Earth's surface, and prolonged exposure would be fatal. How could beings from such a world possibly help civilized species? Lyra studied the human files with growing interest. The images showed beings that looked deceptively fragile, with no natural armor or obvious weapons. They were bipedal, like many spacefaring species, but their muscle density was significantly higher than normal. Their bone structure was designed to withstand gravitational forces that would crush most other beings. Most intriguingly, their military history showed a pattern of winning conflicts against overwhelming odds through tactics, determination, and an apparent inability to recognize when they were defeated. The debate continued for hours, with most representatives arguing against involving the humans. Their ships were built more like mobile fortresses than proper spacecraft, with thick armor plating and massive power systems that seemed unnecessarily complex. Their weapons were crude kinetic systems rather than elegant energy weapons. They had no experience with galactic warfare, no understanding of the swarm's capabilities, and no reason to risk their lives for strangers. But Lyra remembered something from the human cultural files. They had a concept called humanitarian aid that compelled them to help others in need, even at great personal risk. Their history was filled with examples of individuals and nations sacrificing for the welfare of others, sometimes complete strangers. If there was any species in the galaxy that might respond to a desperate plea for help, it would be these strange death-world humans. Elder Counselor Thane called for a vote on whether to send a formal aid request to Earth. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives debated the merits of involving such a primitive species. Some argued that it was better than doing nothing, while others claimed it would be cruel to ask the humans to face certain death. The vote was close, but eventually passed by a narrow margin. The message was transmitted on standard galactic frequencies toward the Sol system. It was a simple request for humanitarian aid in evacuating refugees from worlds under attack by hostile forces. The message was marked as urgent and included basic information about the Crimson Swarm's capabilities. As the transmission sped through hyperspace toward Earth, Lyra could only hope that these mysterious humans would prove to be more than they appeared. On Luna Command Station, orbiting Earth's moon, Admiral Sarah Chen received the transmission at 0300 hours local time. She was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much conflict. She had commanded the human defense fleet during the Outer Colony Wars, fighting off pirates and hostile alien encounters with limited resources and unlimited determination. The message from the Galactic Assembly was unlike anything she had received before. Within an hour, Chen had assembled the Human Defense Council in the station's secure briefing room. General Marcus Rivera, commander of the Terran Marine Corps, arrived first. He was a stocky man with scarred hands and a reputation for never leaving a man behind. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the civilian director of the Colonial Authority, represented the interests of Earth's outer settlements. Director James Walsh of Intelligence brought classified files about the Galactic Assembly and the various alien species within it. Admiral Chen read the message aloud, her voice steady despite the implications. 30 million beings were facing extinction, and the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were powerless to help them. The Crimson Swarm was described as an unstoppable force that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. The galactic powers were asking for Earth's help, though they clearly didn't expect much from humanity's primitive technology. General Rivera was the first to speak. His voice carried the authority of a man who had fought in the worst conflicts of the past 30 years. He had studied the alien files and recognized the tactical situation immediately. The swarm's bioships were formidable, but they relied on overwhelming force and intimidation rather than tactical sophistication. Human military doctrine was built around fighting superior numbers with inferior technology and winning through adaptability and determination. Dr. Vasquez expressed concerns about the logistics of such a mission. The threatened worlds were weeks away even at maximum hyperspace speed. The human defense fleet consisted of only 67 ships, most of them designed for patrol and escort duties rather than major fleet actions. They would be facing an enemy that had defeated civilizations with thousands of ships and millions of years of experience. The odds were mathematically impossible. Director Walsh provided intelligence on the Galactic Assembly's member species. Most were highly advanced but had evolved beyond the need for warfare. Their ships were built for exploration and trade, not combat. Their crews were trained in science and diplomacy, not tactics and weapons. The Assembly's military forces were, essentially ceremonial, designed to intimidate pirates and settle minor disputes rather than fight existential wars. Admiral Chen studied the tactical projections on the briefing room's main screen. The Crimson Swarm's advance was methodical and predictable, following shipping lanes and established trade routes, Their bioships were powerful but appeared to lack the flexibility of human vessels. Most importantly, they had never faced an enemy that fought like humans. Every species they had encountered had either surrendered quickly or been overwhelmed by superior numbers. None had the human tradition of fighting hopeless battles and somehow finding a way to win. The decision was made within 2 hours of receiving the message. The human defense fleet would deploy to the Ethros system and provide whatever assistance they could to the refugees. Every available ship would be committed to the mission, leaving Earth's home system defended only by orbital platforms and reserve vessels. It was a massive risk, but the alternative was to let 30 million innocent beings die while humanity watched from safety. The Death World response, the human defense fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Ethros system in a display of controlled violence that sent shockwaves through local space. 67 ships materialized simultaneously, their arrival causing gravitational distortions that registered on sensors across 3 star systems. The vessels that appeared were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Where most spacefaring species built elegant, efficient ships with smooth curves and minimal mass, human vessels were brutal in their functionality. The flagship UCS Indomitable was a fortress of steel and ceramic armor plating, its hull bristling with weapons ports and sensor arrays. At 800,000 tons, it was twice the size of most galactic dreadnoughts, yet it moved with surprising grace for such a massive vessel. Its escort ships were equally impressive, their designs prioritizing survivability over aesthetics. These were ships built to fight in the hostile environment of space, where a single mistake could mean death for the entire crew. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the Indomitable's bridge, studying the tactical display with growing anger. The Ethros system was a graveyard of broken ships and shattered dreams. Thousands of refugee vessels fled in panic from the inner planets, their engines pushed beyond safe limits in desperate attempts to escape. Hunting them like predators were the bioships of the Crimson Swarm, their living hulls pulsing with alien life, as they systematically destroyed anything that moved. The Swarm's vessels defied conventional understanding of spacecraft design. They were grown rather than built, their hulls composed of modified bone and cartilage that could heal minor damage automatically. Their weapons were organic cannons that fired streams of corrosive acid capable of eating through standard armor plating. Most disturbing of all, they appeared to be intelligent, coordinating their attacks with a hive-mind efficiency that made them nearly impossible to outmaneuver. Chen's communications officer reported contact with a Zephyrian diplomatic vessel on the system's edge. The ship was small and fragile, clearly designed for peaceful missions rather than combat. Its hull was a work of art, covered in crystalline patterns that caught and reflected light in beautiful displays. But there was nothing beautiful about the fear in Ambassador Lyra Windcaller's voice when she appeared on the main screen. Lyra's ethereal features were tight with grief and exhaustion. She had been coordinating rescue efforts for days, watching helplessly as her people died. The arrival of the human fleet had sparked a brief moment of hope, but now she was terrified that these primitive beings would simply become more victims for the swarm. She tried to explain the futility of fighting the bioships, describing how they had destroyed entire civilizations with their adaptive tactics and overwhelming numbers. Admiral Chen listened patiently as Lyra described the swarm's capabilities, but her expression grew harder with each word. The bioships were powerful, but they were also predictable. They relied on fear and intimidation to break their enemies' will to fight. They had never faced an enemy that grew stronger under pressure, that thrived on impossible odds, and turned desperation into strength. They had never faced humans. Chen's tactical officer, Commander Sarah Kim, reported the fleet's combat status. All ships were at full readiness, their crews trained to the highest standards of human military excellence. The Indomitable's main guns were loaded with depleted uranium rounds capable of punching through meter-thick armor plating. The escort ships carried enough missiles to level a small moon. Most importantly, every vessel in the fleet was crewed by humans who understood that retreat was not an option when civilians were in danger. The first contact between human and swarm forces occurred near the fourth planet's orbit. A group of bioships had cornered a convoy of refugee transports, their acid cannons charging for the killing blow. The human destroyer UCS Relentless arrived first, its compact frame dwarfed by the massive bioships. The swarm creatures probably thought it was a scouting vessel, something to be brushed aside before returning to their slaughter. They learned their mistake within seconds. The Relentless opened fire with its main battery, sending a stream of kinetic rounds into the nearest bioship at a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles, each weighing several tons and accelerated by magnetic fields, struck the creature's hull with devastating effect. The bioship's natural armor, evolved to deflect energy weapons, was completely useless against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The bioship's death scream echoed across multiple spectrums of electromagnetic radiation as its body was torn apart by the kinetic impact. The other swarm creatures turned to face this new threat, but they were too slow to adapt to human tactics. The Relentless had already changed position, its engines pushing it into a new attack vector while launching a spread of nuclear-tipped missiles. Across the system, similar scenes played out as human ships engaged the swarm forces. The bioships were formidable opponents, but they had evolved to fight enemies that followed predictable patterns. Galactic species typically engaged in formal battles with clearly defined objectives and rules of engagement. Humans fought like the persistent predators they were, adapting constantly and never giving their enemies time to recover. Captain Maria Santos of the heavy cruiser UCS Thunderbolt demonstrated human tactical flexibility when her ship encountered a swarm battle. Grouped near the second planet, the bioships had formed a defensive formation, their acid cannons aimed at the approaching human vessel. A conventional attack would have been suicide, but Santos wasn't thinking conventionally. She ordered her ship to dive into the planet's atmosphere, using the dense gases to mask her approach. The Thunderbolt emerged from the atmospheric haze directly beneath the swarm formation, its weapons already firing. The bioships were caught completely off guard, their sensors blinded by the electromagnetic interference of the planet's magnetic field. Santos's gunners placed their shots with surgical precision, targeting the joints and connection points of the bioship's organic armor. Within minutes, 3 of the creatures were drifting helplessly, their mobility systems destroyed. The turning point of the battle came when Admiral Chen deployed the fleet's secret weapon, the UCS Retribution, a ship that officially didn't exist in any military records. The vessel was the product of a classified research program that had studied captured alien technology and incorporated it into human designs. The Retribution was smaller than the Indomitable, but carried weapon systems that pushed the boundaries of known physics. The ship's main weapon was a gravitational lance that could create localized space-time distortions. When fired at a bioship, the weapon would create a miniature black hole directly inside the target's hull. The effect was instantaneous and devastating, as the creature's own mass was turned against it. The bioship would collapse inward, its organic structure unable to withstand the gravitational forces tearing it apart from within. Commander Alexei Petrov, the Retribution's captain, was a veteran of humanity's first contact with hostile aliens. He had seen what happened when humans tried to fight fair against superior technology. The answer wasn't to match the enemy's strengths, but to exploit their weaknesses. The swarm bioships were perfectly adapted to conventional space warfare, but had no defense against weapons that violated their basic assumptions about reality. The swarm's hive mind intelligence began to recognize the threat posed by the human fleet. These weren't the helpless prey species they were accustomed to hunting. These were predators in their own right, beings that had evolved on a world where only the strongest and most adaptable survived. The bioships began to withdraw from their attacks on refugee ships, instead focusing their efforts on the human vessels. This was exactly what Admiral Chen had hoped for. Every moment the swarm spent fighting humans was a moment they weren't killing civilians. The human fleet scattered across the system, drawing the bioships into running battles while rescue ships evacuated the remaining Zephyrian population. It was a dangerous game, but one that played to humanity's strengths. Human ships were built to take damage and keep fighting, their crews trained to function under extreme stress. The battle raged for 18 hours across the entire star system. Human ships would engage swarm bioships, inflict maximum damage, then withdraw to regroup and resupply. The swarm creatures, frustrated by their inability to corner the elusive human vessels, began making tactical errors. They would pursue individual ships into prepared ambushes, or spread their forces too thin, trying to cover multiple objectives simultaneously. The final assault came when Admiral Chen concentrated her entire fleet for a coordinated strike on the swarm's main force. The bioships had gathered around Ethros itself, preparing to consume the planet's remaining population. Chen's plan was audacious even by human standards. She would take her fleet directly into the heart of the swarm formation and destroy their command creatures in close combat. The Indomitable led the charge, its massive bulk absorbing tremendous punishment from the swarm's concentrated firepower. The ship's armor plating, forged from materials found only in Earth's high-pressure environment, held against the acid cannon's corrosive streams. Behind the flagship, the rest of the human fleet spread out in a complex formation that confused the swarm's targeting systems. Commander Kim identified the swarm's command creatures by their unique biosignatures and electromagnetic emissions. These were the largest bioships, ancient creatures that had lived for centuries and commanded the lesser swarm members through pheromone signals and telepathic commands. Destroying them would decapitate the swarm's command structure and leave the remaining bioships vulnerable to human tactics. The attack required precise coordination and split-second timing. Each command creature was protected by dozens of smaller bioships, their acid cannons creating overlapping fields of fire that would destroy any conventional attack. But the human fleet didn't attack conventionally. They used their superior speed and maneuverability to create gaps in the swarm's formation, then exploited those gaps with concentrated firepower. Captain Elena Rodriguez of the destroyer UCS Valiant made the decisive strike. Her ship penetrated the swarm's defensive screen through a combination of brilliant piloting and desperate courage. The Valiant's crew knew they were on a suicide mission, but they pressed their attack anyway. Rodriguez brought her ship to point-blank range with the largest command creature and unleashed her entire arsenal in a single devastating salvo. The command creature's death throes were visible across the system as its massive body convulsed and broke apart. The remaining swarm bioships, suddenly cut off from their hive mind network, began to panic. Without central coordination, they were just individual predators facing a disciplined military force. The human fleet methodically hunted down the remaining bioships, their crews showing no mercy for creatures that had shown none to others. The battle's aftermath was a testament to human determination and alien gratitude. The Zephyrian survivors, rescued from certain death by beings they had barely known existed, were overwhelmed by the sacrifice humans had made for them. Ambassador Lyra Windcaller's ship was the first to reach the Indomitable after the fighting ended, her crew eager to offer whatever assistance they could to their saviors. Admiral Chen met with Lyra in the flagship's medical bay, where human doctors were treating wounded crew members with the same care they would show their own species. The sight of humans risking their lives for alien strangers was something the galaxy had never seen before. Most species helped their own kind first and worried about others later, but humans seemed to have an innate drive to protect anyone who couldn't protect themselves. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy faster than lightspeed communication systems could carry it. The Galactic Assembly had expected to receive word of the human fleet's heroic but futile destruction. Instead, they learned that a species they had dismissed as primitive had accomplished what their combined civilizations could not. They had stopped the Crimson Swarm. The political implications were staggering. Humanity had demonstrated military capabilities that far exceeded their apparent technological level. Their ships were crude by galactic standards, but devastatingly effective in combat. Their tactics were unorthodox, but brilliantly executed. Most importantly, they had shown a willingness to fight impossible battles for the sake of strangers, a trait that both inspired and terrified other species. Within weeks of the battle, humanity found itself at the center of galactic politics. Species that had ignored Earth's existence were now requesting military assistance against their own enemies. The Aquatic Collective wanted human help reclaiming their lost ocean worlds. The Silicon Confederacy offered technological exchanges for defense treaties. Even the proud Korthax Republic began to view humanity as equals rather than primitive newcomers. Admiral Chen found herself promoted to the newly created position of Galactic Defense Coordinator, commanding not just human forces but allied fleets from across known space. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, humanity had been begging for membership in the Galactic Assembly. Now they were being asked to defend it. The Zephyrians were among the most grateful of humanity's new allies. Lyra Windcaller became Earth's first permanent ambassador to the Galactic Assembly, her melodic voice now carrying stories of human courage and sacrifice instead of pleas for help. The survivors of Ethros settled on worlds throughout human space, their artistic talents and peaceful nature balancing humanity's warrior culture. The galaxy had learned a crucial lesson. Never underestimate the species that evolved on a death world. Humans might seem primitive and crude compared to the elegant civilizations that had ruled space for millennia, but they possessed something that all the advanced technology in the universe couldn't replicate. They had the will to fight when others would surrender, to sacrifice when others would flee, and to stand guard so that others could sleep safely. The Crimson Swarm would return someday, as they always did. But when they came, they would find humanity waiting for them, ready to prove once again that the greatest weapons in the universe weren't energy cannons or bioships, but courage, determination, and the simple human refusal to let evil triumph over good. The galaxy was no longer defenseless, for it now had guardians who understood that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost.